behalf of the Chief of Air Force, welcome to the Change of Command Parade for the Royal Australian Air Force. This morning we welcome the families and friends of Air Marshal Robert Chipman and Air Marshal Steven Chappell. Representing Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Admiral David Johnston, ACRAN. Associate Secretary of the Department of Defence, Mr Matt Yiannopoulos, PSM. Representing Chief of Navy, Rear Admiral Stephen Tiffin, CSM RAN. Chief of Army, Lieutenant General Simon Stewart, AO DSC. Chief of Joint Capabilities, Lieutenant General John Fruin, AO DSC. Chief of New Zealand Air Force, Air Vice Marshal Darren Webb. Representatives from the Diplomatic Corps. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, shortly under the direction of Squadron Leader John Buckley, the Air Force Band will lead on the Escort Squadron with the cased King's colour for the Royal Australian Air Force. The Escort Squadron is provided by the Air Force Division of Australia's Federation Guard, under the command of Flight Lieutenant Zoe Martin. The colour bearer is Flying Officer Riley Jackson. The colour warrant officer is Warrant Officer Chris Watkins. The colour escorts are Sergeant James Bird and Sergeant Sheridan Kelly. And the colour orderly is LAC Michael Wong. After the Escort Squadron is in position, the colour will be uncased and marched onto the parade. The parade host officer, Air Vice Marshal Harvey Reynolds, will greet the principal official guest, Vice Admiral David Johnston. The incoming Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Steven Chappell and Mrs Melissa Chappell, and the outgoing Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman and Mrs Elise Chipman, will then arrive to be received by the parade. A welcome to country will be offered by Ngunnawal Elder Auntie Serena Williams, accompanied by Flight Lieutenant James Evans on the Yadaki. The Chief of Air Force will then be invited to inspect the Escort Squadron and the Air Force Band. A flypast of aircraft will then occur. Could I please ask you to make sure your mobile phones are off or turned to silent until the completion of the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, the Escort Squadron is now marching on. The King's colour for the Royal Australian Air Force will now be uncased. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the Royal Salute to the King's colour for the Royal Australian Air Force. Members in uniform are to salute when Point of War is played. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The Vice Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Admiral David Johnston, will now be received by the parade. The incoming Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Steven Chappell, will now be received by the parade. Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, will now be received by the parade. Ladies and gentlemen, a welcome to country is a significant ceremony performed by an elder to welcome visitors to their traditional land. Welcome to country is an ancient First Nations tradition that was practiced when a community sought permission to enter another nation's traditional land. Auntie Serena Williams, Ngunnawal elder, will now offer a welcome to country and smoking ceremony.
Good morning, and Yuma. I'd like to make some acknowledgements, and I'd like to acknowledge Vice Admiral David Johnson, Air Marshal Chipman, Air Marshal Chappell, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Auntie Serena Williams, a proud Ngunnawal elder. I was born and lived here on Ngunnawal country all my life. I thank you for the invitation to conduct a welcome to country and smoking ceremony for you here today. You all look incredible, and I love the ongoing relationships the Australian Defence Force has with the Ngunnawal community and with the elders. I'm honoured to be here for the Chief of Air Force changeover to witness Air Marshal Chappell take place as the 28th Chief of Air Force, and I want to congratulate you on this outstanding achievement. I believe there are 6 previous Chair Air Force here today in our presence, and what an honour to have you here. I'd like to acknowledge your contributions that have led in the way of the past. For you, Air Marshal Chappell, to follow on your own journey and for you to create your own story here on these beautiful pathways on beautiful Ngunnawal country. I look forward to the relationships to come here with you and your wife, Mrs. Chappell, and your family here on Ngunnawal country, and I can't wait to share more of our rich culture with you all. Air Marshal Chipman, I'd like to commend you on your exceptional role as the 27th Chief of Air Force and as one of our Indigenous champions here for defence. The relationships you and your wife, Mrs. Chipman, have created here with the Ngunnawal people and the time you have spent learning our culture, understanding and respecting our protocols, learning language, and this has moved us so deeply. And I'm glad to call you an ally and a family and a friend to the Ngunnawal people. You have been an advocate for all Ngunnawal families, for the Air Force, for the Indigenous community and the First Nations people of the Australian Defence Force. And I congratulate you on your new position as Vice Chief Defence of the Force, and I wish you nothing but greatness and success. Welcome. I'd like to acknowledge my elders past, present and future. And I'd like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. And Ngunnawal people that are present also. Up the back, Crystal and Shane, I'd like to acknowledge your presence here today. But I say in my revitalised language, and I say proudly as a Ngunnawal woman and elder, I say, Yumalandi, Yetamora Ngunnawal Dora, hello, come. I will sweep the lands for you to leave your footprints here in beautiful Ngunnawal country. Najan, the water of the Rorial, the Murrumbidgee, the Molonglo, the Gudjimbi and Ginunderi, that will cleanse you of all harm. And Mullian. Mullian is a wedge-tailed eagle, the totem of the Ngunnawal people, and she will guide and protect and oversee you here on your journey and your new pathways on beautiful Ngunnawal country. On behalf of myself, other Ngunnawal elders and Ngunnawal family groups, I welcome you to the beautiful land of Ngunnawal. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Auntie Serena. The Yadaki will be played by Flight Lieutenant James Evans as the smoking ceremony takes place. Air Marshal Chipman will now inspect the escort, squadron and band. Air Marshal Chipman will now inspect the escort, squadron and band. Ladies and gentlemen, Air Marshal Chipman will now address the parade.
Well, thank you, Auntie Serena, for that wonderful welcome to Ngunnawal country. It is a beautiful place for us to call home. Yingara Dindi, Wangarali Jinyin. I add my respects to your elders. I'd like to extend that to Auntie Deb, our Air Force elder, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today and those who serve with distinction. in the Royal Australian Air Force. VCDF Vice Admiral David and Belinda Johnston, to our Associate Secretary Matt Yiannopoulos, distinguished guests, members of the Service Attaché and Advisory Group, ladies and gentlemen, and to all our magnificent aviators on parade this morning, good morning. Today marks a transition in leadership. It has been a wonderful privilege for me to serve as the 27th Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force. I stood before you 2 short years ago and spoke of 3 things I would prioritise: readiness, resilience, and resourcefulness. I expressed them as priorities, not goals, in recognition that there is no milestone or threshold of achievement when our efforts to strengthen them would cease. They shape the emphasis of our work. The work itself is enduring. Striving for excellence is in our DNA, but achievement simply creates a new foundation from which to improve, to innovate, and to set our minds to new ambition. We are, of course, also now driven by necessity and a sense of urgency in this era of great power competition, to deliver combat power sufficient to shift the calculus of our adversary and deter further deterioration in our strategic environment. So today is not mission accomplished, but I hope you'll indulge me as I share my pride in what you've achieved. Our aviators have continued to deliver on operations. First out of the gate, we've been delivering vital assistance, maintaining essential awareness, defending critical supply nodes, strengthening international partnerships, reinforcing our sovereign rights under international law, and demonstrating our strength and preparedness to deter conflict. Across Australia, throughout the Indo-Pacific, from Europe to Antarctica, in arduous and contested environments, our aviators have performed superbly. So too have been our efforts to force generate focused and integrated air power. The scale and complexity of our training missions that we are undertaking today is breathtaking. Bedding in new concepts like agile operations, learning to manoeuvre and sustain our force across our northern infrastructure, and project air power throughout our region. These are the capabilities our strategy of denial demand. And we've also secured significant investments in our future capabilities, including upgrades to our existing platforms, expanding our training system, investing in advanced weapons, committing to a new fleet of C-130Js, and an air battle management system that will integrate our air and missile defence capabilities. We've taken delivery of our first MQ-4 Triton and continued our partnership with Boeing to develop the MQ-28 Ghostbat. This progress underscores the strength of our partnership with industry. Together we are discovering the future, experimenting and co-developing new technologies, delivering new capabilities while sustaining our current force. I acknowledge and thank our industry partners. Your contribution to Australian air power is absolutely essential. This story of achievement, strengthening the readiness and resilience of our force, has been delivered through the resourcefulness of our aviators. I'll never cease to be impressed by your innovation and dedication. I've met aviators using solar panels designed for a car fridge to power and proof test a combat vehicle that enables air battle managers to control the fight from the back of a Land Rover wherever they can get an internet signal. Air Force Training Group have shaved weeks off our courses, increased training throughput, and introduced tailored physical conditioning programs to dramatically improve our training completion rates. And just last week, I celebrated the graduation of our latest air weapons instructors, our next generation of combat leaders. They've just reset the bar again in our understanding and ultimately our ability to deliver and exploit integrated air power. They exemplify what it means when we say our people are our most precious resource, the source of our asymmetric advantage. I take no credit for their work. It's been delivered by them, our aviators, who understand our strategic context and commit their efforts to find a better way. It has been absolutely inspiring to watch them at work. Of course, none of this would happen without the love and support of our families. And I hope to all of our families here today, you recognise how vital your contribution is to our capability. I hope you share our sense of purpose, and I hope you share our sense of pride in Air Force's achievements. And I thank you for making our service possible. We, of course, confront another enemy lurking within our ranks, surfaced by the work of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. We are weaker when the experience of leadership and culture falls unevenly across our organisation, when the experience of Air Force service is life-changing or worse, life-ending. Suicide and suicidality is a complex and multifaceted challenge, but it's not a challenge that we can resolve from. When we do defeat this scourge, we'll look back and recognise that it was the commitment and deliberate effort of all of us, at all levels, in all places and at all times, to create a respectful work environment that treats all aviators with the dignity they deserve. I know that you will stand with me wherever it is that we serve and commit ourselves to overcome this challenge. I'd like to thank the Secretary and CDF and my fellow 3-star and Band 3 officers. It is hard for me to imagine a more capable and committed leadership team. Thank you, colleagues, for your collaborative approach in developing integrated solutions to the extraordinarily complex challenges we face every day, and for your friendship to Elise and I. We look forward to continuing this work with you in the years ahead. Finally, to my wife Elise and our sons Tom, Ollie, Darcy and Charlie, we came into this role conscious of the demands it would place on our family life, but perhaps a little naive to the range of emotions we'd encounter along the way. It'd be cliche to say that I couldn't do this without you, when the reality is we've done it together. My leadership of Air Force has been so much stronger for it. I hope you share my pride. I am sorry that you've shared my burdens. I am deeply grateful that you've shared this experience with me. Thank you. Two recent events bookend my time as Chief. Last month I had an opportunity to talk with Air Marshal Ray Fennell, who was Chief of Air Staff when I first joined the Air Force back in 1989. I asked what his impressions were of Air Force today. He thought it was extraordinary what we were capable of achieving, and it made him very proud. A few days later, I attended a Bomber Command commemoration at the Australian War Memorial on a frosty Canberra morning. There were several hundred people, including 2 vets who flew Lancasters in the Second World War, and others from Korea, Vietnam, and more recent campaigns in the Middle East. 2 young Australian Air Force cadets offered a reflection to conclude the ceremony, one noting that some commentators questioned whether Australia's youth could match the feats and endure the sacrifices of the golden generation. Her response to that was unequivocal: move over, we're ready to lead. And so it is for Elise and I, to move on from leading Air Force, to pass the reins to Chaps and Melissa. We join Ray Fennell to watch on in awe, with pride and full of confidence in your leadership and the generations of Air Force leaders to come. Paradu Asra, and thank you very much.
Sir, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Warrant Officer of the Air Force, Warrant Officer Air Force Ralph Clifton, will now present the Chief of Air Force Distinguished Flag to Air Marshal Chipman. Air Marshal Sir Richard Williams is considered the father of the Royal Australian Air Force and served as the first Chief of the Air Staff. Today, Air Marshal Chipman will continue the tradition commenced at his own change of command ceremony by presenting Air Marshal Chappell with the original sword worn by Sir Richard Williams. The sword was chosen as it signifies the passing of responsibility from one Chief of Air Force to the next. Assisting with the handover are Advocate Talia Shea Colfax and one of the newest members of the Air Force and Aircraft Woman Recruit, Brianna Ryan, No. 1 Recruit Training Unit. Air Marshal Chipman and Air Marshal Chappell will then sign the Change of Command certificate to complete the formal handover. Ladies and gentlemen, Air Marshal Chipman will now be accorded his final salute as Chief of Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand while Air Marshal Chipman and Mrs. Chipman depart the parade. Ladies and gentlemen, Principal Air Chaplain Cox will now deliver his invocation.
Well, good morning. It's a great joy to lead us in this prayer of invocation today at this time of the Chief of Air Force change of command. I invite you to enter into this time of prayer and to give thanks in your own way, in your own heart, as I offer this prayer of invocation. Let's pray. Almighty God, Creator of all, in whom we live and move and have our being, we come into your presence in hope and with thanksgiving. As we gather here on this occasion of the Chief of Air Force change of command, we acknowledge your goodness to our nation, giving thanks for our leaders and those who defend the many freedoms that define our lives. We thank you today again for the gift of leadership as Air Marshal Chappell takes command of the Royal Australian Air Force. Lord, we ask today for your blessing and favour to be upon Air Marshal Chappell, that you would grant him the strength to shoulder the responsibilities that lie ahead, and may his leadership be marked by compassion, courage, and unwavering commitment to duty. We commit Air Marshal Chappell and his family into your care as they walk together through this new season of service. Gracious God, we also acknowledge our outgoing Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Chipman, who has served with honour and distinction. We thank you for his dedication, sacrifice and commitment. We ask your blessing on Air Marshal Chipman and his family as he steps into the role of Vice Chief of the Defence Force. May they continue to know your presence with them. We place our trust in your divine wisdom, Lord, and ask for your guidance to be upon our leaders. May they be a beacon of hope and inspiration to those they lead. Amen.
Thank you, Principal Air Chaplain Cox. Ladies and gentlemen, Air Marshal Steven Chappell, Chief of Air Force, will now deliver his address.
Thank you, Auntie Serena, for welcoming us to Ngunnawal country today and for your wonderful words. May I extend my respects to Auntie Deb, our Air Force Elder, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, past and present, who have served with the Royal Australian Air Force. Good morning, Vice Admiral Johnson, Mr. Yiannopoulos, aviators of the Royal Australian Air Force, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In 1993, I joined to lead, to fly, and if called upon to fight in defence of our nation and its interests. That calling still inspires me, and I'll return to that theme shortly. Joining just after the Cold War, there was no real sense any conflict or trouble was in the future. I was trained by those who had served their entire careers in a peacetime setting, as had those before them. Across Air Force, my colleagues were in a similar situation. Yet within a decade of us graduating from the Australian Defence Force Academy, aviators were flying into the unknown, delivering the first waves of interfet troops, deploying to fly combat missions in Iraq, deploying to control air traffic around Baghdad, control coalition air power in Afghanistan, and deploy to fly overland ISR missions in the Middle East. We were able to do those things because we were fortunate to stand upon the shoulders of those who'd gone before us. They might not have deployed into harm's way, but they maintained and improved the standards. they had kept the faith. In more recent times, I can think of numerous examples of aviators keeping the faith. I'll briefly mention two. During the pandemic, aviators, primarily from air mobility, combat support, and surveillance and response groups, continued to deliver operational air power in our nation's interests. Around 4,000 aviators flew 4,500 operational sorties, crossing numerous Australian and international health jurisdictions in the process. In doing so, they accrued just under 90,000 days of quarantine, or 245 years, as a result of their duty. Over 80 aviators spent 100 days or more in quarantine. One aviator spent 250 days in quarantine. By any measurement, those aviators conducted themselves in the finest traditions of the Royal Australian Air Force. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank them and their loved ones for their service and sacrifice. They kept the faith. For my second example, I'll focus on the humble professionalism of the aviators who, since 1985, have been maintaining the ejection seats on the Hornet family of aircraft. We had never used one of those seats in anger until two of our aircrew had to pull the handle in December 2020 in the bottom left-hand corner of the ejection envelope. They walked away in one piece. Generations of technicians quietly maintained those ejection seats over countless training and combat sorties, all the while hoping their efforts would never be called upon. When their fellow aviators needed them most, they were there, as we knew they would be every time we strapped into a jet. They kept the faith. So where are we now? Well, as the National Defence Strategy confirms, Australia faces its most challenging strategic environment since the Second World War. We are, in my words, in a strategic autumn. Our role as an Air Force is to generate and deliver air power as part of an integrated, focused force. And we will do this with our joint ADF and broader defence colleagues, with our interagency partners, our industry partners, and internationally with our allies and partners. Executing our role contributes to deterrence, discouraging and restraining a potential adversary, making sure each day their decision is not today, striving to ensure they don't take us from an autumn into a winter. To achieve this, we need to continue to be ready, resilient and resourceful. And I'd like to acknowledge the vector Air Marshal Robert Chipman has put us on, and I'd like to acknowledge the platform our predecessors have given us. Now we will focus our efforts to ensure we look after ourselves and each other and prepare for the challenges and the opportunities the future holds, both in the near term and in setting the conditions for success in the decades to come. Doing so will enable us to sustainably generate and deliver highly effective air power with agility, asymmetry and depth, and if called upon to deliver it with a high degree of lethality and survivability. Our keys to success are twofold: looking after each other as an embodiment of our defence values, and doing the ordinary things extraordinarily well, maintaining and building the standards of our professional mastery. We will keep the faith. My role as your Chief of Air Force is to serve you, our aviators, and our nation in this noble endeavour. As I mentioned, my initial calling continues to resonate: to lead with clarity and collaboratively with my ADF and APS peers, to support you generate and deliver air power as part of an integrated and focused force, and to ensure, if called upon, we are well prepared to fight to defend our nation and its interests. A calling to serve requires extraordinary levels of support. And I'd like to acknowledge the incredible support of my loved ones, family and friends throughout my life and years of service. I am honoured to be your 28th Chief of Air Force, and I look forward to repaying the trust placed in me. I will keep the faith. Per Adjua ad Astra.
Thank you, sir. The Warrant Officer of the Air Force, Warrant Officer Air Force Ralph Clifton, will now order the hoisting of the Chief of Air Force Distinguishing Flag. This flag will fly in front of Russell officers during Air Marshal Chappell's tenure as the Chief of Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, Air Marshal Chappell will now be accorded his first General Salute as Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the departure of Air Marshal Chappell and Mrs. Chappell. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain standing for the departure of the Vice Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Admiral David Johnston. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the departure of the King's Colour for the Royal Australian Air Force, the Escort Squadron and the Air Force Band. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the change of command ceremony for the Royal Australian Air Force. The invited guests are now asked to join Air Marshals Chipman and Chappell in the R1 courtyard for light refreshments. Have a great day. Good morning.